Good evening, sleepy soul. Tonight we drift slowly through the soot-covered streets of Victorian England, a time of horse-drawn cabs, gas lamps, top hats, and very peculiar work. You see, not everyone was a banker or a baron. Some earned their coin doing jobs so strange, so grimy, or so oddly specific that they feel like something out of fiction. But they were real, very real, and someone had to do them. Tonight you'll meet the forgotten workers, the soot-faced, mud-caked, rat-chasing, corpse-snatching, chimney-climbing souls who kept the Victorian machine running from the shadows. No need to rush. We'll take it slow. Let the smog roll in, the lamplight flicker, and your breath soften. Let's begin with the strangest job of them all. Chapter 1. The Resurrectionists. Grave robbers for hire. In the quiet cemeteries outside London, when the fog was thick and the mourners gone home, a different sort of worker arrived. They were called resurrectionists, also known as body snatchers. Their job? To steal corpses, not for black magic, not for ransom, but for medical schools. In the early 1800s, medical colleges needed fresh cadavers for anatomy lessons. But the law only allowed them to dissect executed criminals. There weren't enough of those. So, surgeons quietly hired men to acquire bodies from fresh graves. They dug quickly, lifted quietly, and left behind barely a trace. Some worked in teams. One would distract the watchman, the other would dig. They earned well, more than a factory worker might see in a month. But it was risky. If caught, they weren't usually hanged, but they were beaten, chased, sometimes tarred and feathered. Still, they worked, because in a city bursting with death, there was always demand. Chapter 2. The Rat Catchers. Heroes beneath the floorboards. Imagine crouching in the crawl space of an old bakery, holding a sack and waiting for dozens of rats to run at your face. That was daily life for the rat catchers. Victorian London had a rat problem, a big one. They crept through sewers, gnawed through pantry doors, nested in beds and skirts and drains. So, families and businesses hired rat catchers, specialists who knew how to bait, trap, and sometimes even trained ferrets or dogs to hunt them. Some rat catchers became famous, like Jack Black, who claimed to be the royal rat catcher under Queen Victoria. He wore a top hat, a long coat, and carried cages of live rats on his back. He'd sometimes tame them and sell them as pets to fancy ladies. But most rat catchers lived hard lives. Bitten hands, diseased lungs, little thanks. Still, someone had to keep the plague at bay. Chapter 3. The Mudlarks. Treasure hunters in the Thames. At low tide, the Thames riverbank turned into thick black sludge, smelly, sticky, and dangerous. But to the mudlarks, it was a treasure field. Mudlarks, often children or old widows, waded into the river with sacks and sticks, looking for anything they could sell. Coal, rope, scraps of metal, sometimes even lost jewelry or coins. They worked in silence, barefoot or in worn boots, covered in muck from ankle to eyebrow. It was cold, miserable, and full of hazards like broken glass, nails, and the occasional dead pig floating by. But for many, it was the only way to eat. And some, with sharp eyes and quick hands, made just enough to survive another day. Chapter 4. The Night Soil Men, Cleaning the Unspoken. Now we descend even deeper into the darkest alleys and oldest homes, because someone, dear listener, had to empty the toilets. In an era before indoor plumbing, most houses had chamber pots or outhouses. And where did all that material go? Enter the night soil men. They worked after sunset, carrying heavy buckets of human waste down narrow lanes. Their job was to scoop, haul, and dump London's filth, often into waiting carts, bound for out-of-town cesspits. It stank, it splashed, it made your clothes unwearable, and your neighbors avoid you. But it paid well, and some men wore the smell as a badge of pride. They were invisible by day, but essential to the city's survival. As your eyelids grow heavier, we'll continue next with leech collectors, chimney sweeps, matchstick girls, and a man who watched your windows all day just to open them if you fainted.
Chapter 5. The Leech Collectors, Wading Through Blood and Bogs. The Victorian era was full of strange medical beliefs, and one of the most popular? Bloodletting. Doctors believed that many illnesses, from headaches to fevers, were caused by too much blood. And so, they turned to leeches, slimy, wriggling little vampires. But where did the doctors get them? From the leech collectors, men, women, and sometimes even children who waded into marshes, ponds, and streams to gather these creatures. How? They often did it the simplest, grimmest way, by walking barefoot into still water and waiting. The leeches latched on, 1, then 5, then dozens. When enough were clinging to their legs, they'd scrape them off into jars. The job was dangerous. Too many bites could cause infection, even blood loss. And the waters weren't always friendly. Snakes, sharp rocks, or sudden currents could make a routine day fatal. But leech collectors kept going, because apothecaries always needed more. And for a few pennies, they paid with pain. Chapter 6. The Matchstick Girls, Lighting the World, Burning Themselves. Imagine a factory full of girls, some as young as 8, hunched over long benches. Their task? Dipping sticks of wood into glowing yellow phosphorus. They were the Matchstick Girls. Victorian homes depended on matches to light fires, candles, and gas lamps. But the process of making them was toxic. The phosphorus they used seeped into their skin, their bones, even their teeth. Many developed something called phossy jaw, which caused immense pain and disfigurement. And yet, they kept working. They needed the money. Their families needed food, and there were few options for poor girls in the city. They sang songs as they worked, shared gossip, watched one another's backs, and in 1888, they did something extraordinary. They went on strike, one of the first successful labor protests by women in England. They fought for better pay, safer conditions, and the right to survive. Chapter 7. The Chimney Sweeps. Tiny bodies in narrow flues. Few jobs were darker, literally and figuratively, than that of the chimney sweep boy. In Victorian houses, fireplaces burned constantly, and chimneys had to be cleaned, or the house might catch fire. But the flues were narrow, sometimes just 9 inches wide, too narrow for adults. So children, often orphans or from workhouses, were forced into the job. Clothed in rags, covered in soot, they climbed into the black tunnels, wiggled their way up using elbows and knees, and scraped the soot away with brushes or bare hands. It was terrifying. They often got stuck. Some suffocated. Others were burned when a fire was lit too early. Their lungs filled with ash, their bodies bruised, their names forgotten, until reformers demanded change. The Chimney Sweepers Act of 1875 finally banned the practice. But for decades, these boys risked their lives just to keep the hearth warm. Chapter 8. The Fainting Room Attendant. Guardian of the overdressed. In upper-class homes, there was often a small, well-furnished room tucked near the parlor, called the fainting room. Why? Because Victorian fashion, especially for women, could be dangerous. Corsets were drawn so tight they restricted breathing. Layer after layer of fabric made movement stiff and airless. Heated salons and crowded social events often led to dizzy spells or full fainting fits. And so, wealthy households employed a fainting room attendant. Their job? To gently carry fainting women into the room, loosen the corset, offer smelling salts, and ensure no embarrassment occurred. They were nurse, butler, part fashion casualty responder. It was a job of discretion, patience, and surprisingly frequent use, because when your clothes could knock you unconscious, someone had to catch you. Chapter 9. The Street Musicians. Notes in the Fog. At twilight, when the lamps flickered and fog crept over cobbles, the city came alive with sound. Violins, accordions, penny whistles, singing voices. These were the street musicians, workers of rhythm and melody. Many were immigrants. Others were blind or disabled, unable to find other work. They played for coins, for warmth, for a moment of human connection. They stood near taverns, bakeries, train stations. Sometimes they wandered. Some became beloved, known by name, requested at parties. Others faded into the fog, song unfinished. Music was their job, and sometimes their only friend.
Chapter 10. The Crossing Sweep, the Pavement Gentleman. The streets of Victorian London were no place for clean shoes. Muddy, filthy, horse-drawn carriages clattered by, leaving droppings and grime in their wake. But the wealthy couldn't be expected to soil their boots, could they? Enter the crossing sweep. Armed with a stiff broom and a hopeful expression, these workers stationed themselves at busy intersections. When a well-dressed lady or gentleman approached, they'd rush forward, sweeping a clean path through the muck. It wasn't a paid position. It was based on tips. A grateful nod might mean a coin, or nothing at all. Some sweepers wore shabby uniforms, others added flair, a feathered cap or a bow tie, hoping to stand out. For many poor boys and elderly men, this was honest work in a harsh world, a way to earn without stealing. They were the invisible butlers of the streets, their names lost, but their brooms whispered thanks with every sweep. Chapter 11. The Pure Finder, when filth was gold. Yes, this next job is exactly what it sounds like. Pure was the Victorian euphemism for dog poop, and pure finders made a living collecting it. Why? Because tanneries used dog excrement in the process of curing leather. The enzymes helped soften the hides. So these odd workers roamed alleyways and parks with buckets and shovels, gathering what dogs left behind. It was smelly, shameful, and occasionally competitive. Some even guarded productive neighborhoods from rivals. A good day's collection might earn enough for bread and tea. Their hands were calloused, their clothes were soiled, but their contribution, surprisingly valuable. Chapter 12. The Knocker-Upper, a human alarm clock. Before alarm clocks buzzed and phones chirped, Victorians had knocker-uppers. Their job? To wake people up. Armed with long sticks, bamboo poles, or even pea shooters, they'd go door to door in the early morning hours. Tap, tap, tap on the second-floor window, or a puff of a pea to the glass. Factory workers, milkmen, dock laborers, all needed someone to rouse them on time, and knocker-uppers took this job seriously. Some even kept clients' schedules written down. Who needed to wake at 4:15, who at 5:30. It paid pennies, but it was steady. And in a strange way, they were trusted more than clocks. They didn't fail. They didn't ring and snooze. They knocked until you got up. Chapter 14. The Lamplighter, Bringer of Evening. As the sky turned orange and shadows stretched across the cobblestones, a figure walked from post to post. The lamplighter. Gas lamps lined the streets, but they didn't turn on by magic. Each one had to be lit by hand. Lamplighters carried long poles with flames at the tip, using them to ignite the gas inside the glass lanterns. They walked routes of dozens, sometimes hundreds of lamps. Then, just before dawn, they returned to snuff them out. Some climbed ladders, others used extendable rods. In fog, in wind, in snow, they were the quiet custodians of nighttime. Their job gave the city its glow. And if a lamplighter missed a corner, the darkness there felt heavier. Chapter 15. The Gas Leak Inspector, Nose of the Household. Early gaslight homes were revolutionary, bright, modern, efficient, but also dangerous. Gas leaks were common and deadly. Enter the gas leak inspector, a man with an unusually sensitive nose. He was hired by households or landlords to walk through rooms, sniffing carefully for signs of carbon monoxide or methane. He carried nothing but a candle, a metal hood, and a trained sense of smell. If the candle flickered near a pipe, a leak. If his nose tingled, time to ventilate. Some even boasted their talent in the papers. Finest noses in London. It was delicate work, and at times deadly. One wrong step, one strong breeze, and the inspector might be the first to fall. But their skill saved lives. Chapter 15. The Organ Grinder, Tunes on the Move. Finally tonight, as the stars blink into view, you may hear a faint melody down the street. It's the organ grinder. Pushing a wheeled barrel organ, a sort of mechanical music box, these performers turned cranks to release songs into the smoky air. They were often Italian immigrants, colorful scarves, dusty boots, hopeful eyes. Sometimes a trained monkey collected coins from children. Sometimes they sang along. Other times they simply cranked and hoped for kindness. Their music danced through alleys, soot-stained and sweet. It was a job, it was survival, and for some, it was art.
Chapter 16. The Bone Pickers. Scavengers of the Gutter. Long before organized waste collection, the streets of Victorian London overflowed with scraps of metal, of food, and of bone. That's where the bone pickers came in. They were not butchers. They didn't kill, but they collected what was left behind. Walking through markets, butchers' yards, and even street gutters, bone pickers gathered animal bones of every shape and size. They sold them to glue factories, comb makers, and fertilizer processors. Bones had value, even when they no longer had flesh. Bone pickers were often elderly or disabled, too frail for heavier labor, but they carried sacks on their backs, poked at gutters with sticks, and made a living from what others stepped over. You might never notice one walking by, but they noticed everything beneath your feet. Chapter 17. The Link Boys. Guiding you through the fog. In the thick London mist, after nightfall, street lighting didn't reach every corner. For the wealthy, this posed a problem: how to get safely to the theater or back home. Enter the link boy, a young child, often barefoot, often no more than 10 years old, would carry a torch or link through the darkened streets, leading the way for a tip. They knew every alley, every puddle. They'd wave their flame in front of you, scaring off thieves, warning of puddles, and clearing your path. Some link boys worked outside taverns, waiting for drunken gentlemen to stagger out. Others had regular customers, ladies returning from opera, bankers heading home. It was dangerous. The flames could go out. Robbers lurked, and the soot from the torch blackened their faces and lungs. But for a few pence, they were the guardians of the night. Chapter 18. The Hair Sellers. Trade in the tresses of the dead. Wigs were fashionable, hairpieces even more so. But where did all that hair come from? Well, sometimes from the living, and sometimes from the dead. Hair sellers in Victorian London operated quietly, and not all of them were ethical. Some women sold their own locks, cut in sorrow or desperation for a few coins, but others, well, they worked with undertakers and harvested hair from corpses. Blonde curls, chestnut braids, even gray strands, all had a price. It was washed, combed, and sorted in back rooms, then sold to wig makers or added to hairpieces for the wealthy. It was a strange economy of beauty, grief, and silence. And though no one spoke of it publicly, many a lady's elegant bun carried the story of someone else's life or death. Chapter 19. The School Bellboy, the Keeper of Time. In some poorer schools, teachers didn't have clocks, so they relied on a student, often the most punctual, sometimes the poorest, to be the bellboy. Each morning he rang the handbell at the school door, again at the end of lessons, again at lunchtime,
He was the voice of the clock, marking every tick of the academic day. It was a quiet job, but full of responsibility, and sometimes pride. If he forgot, chaos. If he rang too early, confusion. But if he rang right on time, the world made sense for a moment. He might not learn much algebra, but he knew how to measure a day. Chapter 20, The Shoeblack, Polishing the City. Beneath marble banks and beside flickering lamps, little wooden boxes waited, and behind them stood the shoeblacks. Boys and sometimes grown men who offered to shine your shoes for a coin. Armed with brushes, polish, and rags, they worked the boots of London's businessmen, soldiers, and clerks. A quick nod, a raised foot, and the rhythm began. Buff, swipe, shine. The best shoeblacks had regular clients. The worst were chased away from doorsteps. Some operated in organized crews, wearing uniforms. Others worked alone, fiercely guarding their corners. It was simple. It was repetitive. It was survival. And as the city's carriages rumbled by, each shine was a tiny glint of dignity.
Chapter 21. The Matchhawkers, Sparks in the Fog. Matches, penny a box. That cry echoed down alleyways and market streets as tiny figures with red noses and threadbare coats held up trays of wooden matchboxes. They were the matchhawkers. Often children, often orphans, they walked from dusk to dawn trying to sell enough matches to earn a crust of bread. Sometimes they were barefoot. Sometimes they carried infants on their backs. Many slept in doorways. And yet they stood proud, trays carefully displayed, voices steady. "Penny a box, sir? Warm your hearth?" The job was simple, but it was survival against the odds. Some vanished into the fog, some endured, and some were immortalized in stories, like the little match girl flickering into fairy tale tragedy. Chapter 22. The besom makers, crafting brooms from the wild. Far from the bustle of the city, in damp sheds and country lanes, another odd profession thrived, the besom maker. Besoms, simple witchy brooms made of twigs bound to a handle, were still used by country folk, street sweepers, and servants. Makers wandered forests gathering birch twigs, hazel sticks, and lengths of green wood. Then, by hand, they lashed them together, tying with cord or vine, trimming carefully. The result? A rustic broom, functional, earthy, quiet. They sold them at market stalls, leaning like stiff scarecrows against weathered carts. Besom makers didn't shout their trade, they let the wind carry their work. And in a world of grime, soot, and dust, someone had to craft the tools to clear it away. Chapter 23. The Powder Testers, Faces of Danger. The Victorian era loved cosmetics, pale powders, rosy creams, eye drops that widened the pupil. But safety standards? Nearly non-existent. Some products contained lead, arsenic, or mercury. And so cosmetic companies hired powder testers, often poor girls or desperate widows, to try new products on their own skin. If the powder tingled, they were told it was working. If it burned, part of the process. Over time, they developed rashes, breathing issues, and worse. But their suffering paved the way for beauty. Some never knew the risks. Others did, but chose the coins over silence. In the flickering mirrors of the Victorian boudoir, they were the invisible foundation.
Chapter 25. The Night Watchman, the Last to Sleep. And finally, we come to the last profession of the night, the job that guarded all others, the one whose footsteps echoed long after the city had gone still. The Night Watchman. He walked the empty streets with a lantern and truncheon, listening for trouble, checking locked doors, watching for fire. Sometimes he dozed in a doorway. Other times he sang softly to stay awake. He knew the smells of every block, the creaks of every iron gate, the families who slept above him, and the ones who never came home. He was invisible and indispensable. When all others slept, he remained, not just to protect, but to witness. He saw the crossing sweep stumble home. He nodded to the knocker-upper. He helped the link boy when the torch went out. He was the keeper of stories. And though no one thanked him, he knew his worth. And now, dear listener, your journey through the fog-draped alleyways of odd Victorian jobs comes to a close. May the night soil men, the rat catchers, the match girls, and mirror boys find their rest, as do you. Sleep well and dream slowly.